is there. This was before, I mean today, I don't know about America, but we have cable pressurization. You know, you have a 4,000 pair cable, which services 4,000 customers, usually with a lead sheath on it. There used to be, and then they went over to plastic ones. And the smaller cables have jelly in them. So generally, the cable pressurization and jelly inside the cable, you wouldn't get any cable breakdowns. But at the time I was there, what would happen, you know, the lead would get eroded through electrolysis, you know, some tram electricity was running down it or something like that. And you'd end up with a hole and water would get in. When that happened in this exchange, it was like a 4,000 pair cable, and it started, the moisture comes from the outside and works its way in. These are paper insulated cables. And so as that happens, all the lights around the switchboard start coming up. And the operators are plugging in and there's nothing there, just a crackle, nothing there. Then which are real faults, which are absolutely. So all of a sudden we've got to go around and do something about this. And we've got to find out, first of all, where's the cable, which is it, and get round to the main distribution frame where the cable comes into the exchange and pull out all the fuses quick. And then every line that's faulty, they put a wire onto it with a number unattainable tone. This is a continuous tone. So when the operator touched the point of a plug to see whether it was engaged, you get this tone in and say, sorry, that line's not available. So that was just one of the things that we had, which was a bit of fun. So let's go to the next picture. Yeah, this is not, the pictures aren't very good, they're very old pictures. But this is the test desk. And this is one of the jobs I had when I first went there, was to work on this test desk. And you see the meters, this is the meter, the old-fashioned meter. And you had a chair each, there's like, that's a 3-4 position test desk. And the main thing there was to test the telephone lines. And to get, where I'd been working in an automatic exchange, I could put a plug in, dial up that number on what they call a test selector, and then test the line. You know, make sure I tested into the exchange to see I got the 50 volts in the ground, and out to line to see whether I got the 2 microfarad capacitor, which is usually across the line because the telephone connected. But this was a manual exchange, and they didn't have automatic test selectors. But what they did have was a TT. That stands for testing telephonist. And this is a lady who was up on the floor above in that switch room at the last position. And anyone that had a problem would go to her first, and she would tell us that you've got a fault. And there was a pneumatic tube. I don't think you can see it here, but there was usually a pneumatic tube, certainly in the exchange I was in, came down here. And so they had these little carriers, and they put the docket in the carrier, and you know, a bit like you get at the bank here, and it would come down and plop out into the basket at the bottom, and you'd have a look and test the line and whatnot. This was quite handy because because to get a line on test, you had to press a button, and this button put you straight onto the headset of the testing telephonist. So you didn't have to wait for her to answer it. You just press the button, so you know, line number 2468 on 3, and she would connect it, and you would patch it down to your to the test list and you could test it. Well, of course, you could press the button and close and throw your transmitter cut-off key, and you could listen to what's going on upstairs. You know, they tell all the gossip. Some of them knew about that, and they'd unplug their headsets, but others didn't. And so you had to do a bit of fun. The other thing was that every so often, if you were friendly with the testing telephonist, she'd send you a sweet or a toffee down the which was all right, as long as the damn toffee didn't come out of the carrier, because that happened on quite a few occasions. And you had this like 2.5-inch tube, you had to dismantle the whole damn thing because this damn toffee's in the carrier. So that was that bit. The other thing I didn't mention, back in the switch room, this is what they call the B position. The ones I showed you is the A position where customers on the exchange make the call. There was another position called the B, which was sort of like a step towards automatic. It was called SFJ, straightforward junctions. And this is for calls coming into this exchange who wanted to speak to someone on this exchange. And that would come in through a relay set, and it would light a bulb and also flash a light and also go straight onto the operator's headset. And she'd see which light was flashing, pick it up, say number please, plug it in. And then from then onwards it was totally automatic. It would automatic ringtone to send the calling and ringing on the line. And then when they finished, they just unplug it. Now, the thing about that was that the operator, as soon as she plugged her headset in, she was busy and she couldn't stop. There were uniselectors which automatically stepped round and fed all these calls to her. So you couldn't do it, you just kept doing that. As she unplugged, then automatically it would transfer all her calls to the operator next door. So that one had it. Now, so that got a bit, it weren't very popular when you did that. So, and at night time, when the traffic was relatively low, there would be like 6 positions, but only one person working, and they'd plug into one and they'd walk up and down, taking a call from each one as they came along. But that was called straightforward junction working. So, that's the test desk. Let's have a look at the next one.
Did you ever see or hear about operators wearing roller skates?
They could have done. They could have done on that. They didn't, because the one I was in, it was sort of like, I suppose from here to the end of the table there. But no, I mean that was a real fun place to work. Anyhow, the other thing, because I think incidentally I have copies of my article which you can have. I've got half a dozen or so of them. But one of the jobs I had was to look after the power plant, and this was basically a three-phase motor driving a DC generator, and in the normally it was just floating across. It had a thing called a Brown and Bovary voltage regulator, and this would match the output current with an input current, so the battery's effectively floating on it. And both batteries are usually in parallel on the exchange, and as the traffic built up, so did the load, the current, and there'd be another one of these which we would start up round about sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock, the busy hour being between 10 and 11 each working day. So we'd have to turn that on. Now, one of the things that we had to do once a year was to do what they call a conditioning cycle. And the idea of this is to see whether the batteries were still okay, because the whole idea of the battery, as well as being a low impedance source of power, was also there in case the power would fail. So you had batteries that should hold up the exchange for a significant amount of time, at least enough to get a mobile generator in or something. So once a year we had to uncouple the 2 batteries, which was done with sort of knife switches on this control panel, and put one battery on the exchange and run the exchange to drain the battery, and measure the specific gravity of the cells and the current drain and some little calculation. And at the end of the day you should be able to see whether it was at least 40% efficient. But on this particular occasion, the previous guy to me never did it because he was too frightened to do it. But I thought, hell, we better do this and try it out. So we started it sort of around about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and within about half an hour, all the relays were not working. It was grinding, and the operators were going, what's happening? You know, and very quickly we discovered that battery had it. So I had to get the breakers over, put in the old batteries, start up the generators, float one and recharge the other one quickly, and then they came back later and changed out the whole of this battery that was in there. Next one. I think Yeah, there's the two generators, three-phase motors driving DC generators, and the control panel here. There's these enormous breakers, you know, I mean, we're talking hundreds of amps here. And you'd have to adjust the voltage so that it matched the battery. And when you got it just right, you pull it in, a bit like pulling a pint of beer in an English pub. And if you didn't get the voltage quite right, you'd God almighty, bang, and the thing would jump. You'd have to start playing around with it again. So that was that. So.
Was that really noisy?
Oh, it was. I mean, these things are about this big.
Yeah.
It had a handle on it, and it had big chunks of copper, you know. And as you pulled the lever down, it would go on there. The bang was the breaker coming out. Yeah. Okay, next one. What have we got? Oh, this is another picture of the tower. I put this one in just as a matter of interest, really, because this is a payphone. Yeah, this is what they used to use. In fact, this is a very modern one, as you can see. It's got a dial. But before that, they were exactly the same, but the dial wasn't there, just a blanking disc. And this is called an A and B button. I don't know if you ever had anything like this in America. But what you do, you would take pennies, sixpences, and shillings. This was before England went over to the new pence, and 100 pennies in a pound. We had pounds, shillings, and pence. And you put your pennies in, and that took a short circuit off the dial. In fact, you could dial 9, 0, and 1, but the other numbers you couldn't do. You needed 9, so you could dial 999, which you couldn't 911, without putting any money in. And 100, which was what you dialed for the operator. But sometimes people want to make a long distance call, or a toll call, or a trunk call, in which case they dial 100 for the operator, and she would say, right, put in X amount of money. And you would put in the pennies. Now, the pennies were like about 1.5 inches in diameter, English pennies originally. And as you put them in, they hit what was called the copper gong. And inside there's literally a gong with a transmitter on it. So as the pennies went in, it would dong, dong, so she could hear and count how many pennies you put in. Then if you put a sixpence in, which is, it would hit this, what they call the silver gong. And that go ding. And if you put a shilling in, which is worth 2 sixpences, as you all know, 12 pence, it would hit the bell twice as it through the chute, go ding, ding. So she could work out how much money. Now, every so often, she wasn't listening properly, she'd get you to press button B, and you get all the money back in the bottom. You have to do it again. Now, once you got the money in there, you couldn't talk. Because until you pressed the button, so you get the ringing, you could hear, and when they answered, you pressed button A, and that would drop the money into the cash box at the bottom, and you could then talk. Now, like everything, there's ways of dealing with these things. One thing you could do, just so that you got your money back at the end of the conversation, was to shout into the earpiece. Right? Because the microphone, and this is a carbon microphone, 2 bits of carbon with granules between it, and that was shorted out until you pressed button A. But if you shouted into the earphone, you could do it. The other thing you could do is to shout out the money chute, right? And by shouting out the money chute, you could talk to the silver gong, or the copper gong, or the silver transmitter, and get some sort of conversation. The other thing you do, if you're quite clever, because as I said, you could dial 9, 0, and 1, depending on what number you wanted, you could actually back dial. So you pull it over to 0, but only take it back so many pulses to get the numbers you want. The other thing you could do, you could tap it out, right? You lift the phone up and tap the
oh, that's hard to do.
Switch, right, to do that. So anyhow, I just thought I'd mention that as a business side. Anyhow, any questions? That's basically it. That's all right. All right.
long.
So
That was before the
years
pulse
did you
tone
do
at
this?
the end.
Oh, I started
free
in,
call.
it was nine, I became youth in training in
The guys
1961.
that started Apple, it was the first product they came up with.
The ding,
This is
ding,
the
ding
article, and if
recording?
you-
You
If
know,
you're
the end,
interested, I've
the
got
end
the
of the longest is called
Discuss.
beep or something like that, you know, it has special tone. That was,
I started in 1961, but actually.
something to do with the charging, so you could make it a free charge.
And when did you go?
Like it was done internally.
Oh, that's one of the
So they
things
built this
I,
box,
when it went automatic to a Strauger step,
64 to
Strauger
68.
step-by-step
So
system.
you could, you know, that day there wasn't an internet, but somehow that
I
worked.
volunteered to go and help in the cut
That was the first Apple product.
where they had the main
Back before they
distribution
were
I have
frame.
something to share.
All these guys sitting with crash helmets on and goggles and broomsticks with string feeding up through all these little wedges which were wedging out the new exchange. And then on the other side, where the old exchange was, they had tapes lined up on the fuses of the other one. So first of all, they pull all the fuses out so that the whole old exchange was dead. Then they pull all these wedges out and the new one was switched off, which was automatic. Of course, they had to first of all check that there was no 999 calling going on at the time, no emergency call. And then they did it. And of course, you did this thing very early in the morning before the main traffic. And you then go around and all the equipment grinding away because all those calls that were in progress were dropped. And they were all calling again. And in fact, quite interesting, I was showing Bob the other day, I got a letter following this article. I got a letter from a chap who was my apprentice when I was a technical officer. And he was telling me about how he'd been on to the switch over as well. And that he had a telephone, he had to go around checking to see whether what they call a permanent glow. And some of the phone call, the light comes on, stays on. And one lady said, oh, I thought I had to wait for the dial tone to go off before I could dial. So, yeah, that's interesting. Other people would not let go of their candlestick telephones. They had to be, you know, the candlesticks,
I still have a couple.
have you? Very collector's item. But they had to convert those and put dials on them.
Yeah, he's got it. They were $1.
So do you appreciate your cell phones?
Well, interestingly on that, because as I said, I started off there doing that. I ended up putting in cellular systems around the world, Hong Kong, Mauritius, San Ramon Valley, and ended up with Nextel. And it's quite interesting, when I did the UK one, that was my first cellular experience, I was pretty bored with the job I had at the time. Like competitive ordering of telephone exchange systems. It was very boring. It was a glorified postman's job. And I applied for this job for cellular radio. And it said, knowledge of radio an advantage, but not essential. and I got my ham radio things, so I applied myself. He said, what do you know about radio? I said, well, so I'd be more into telephone exchange switching. I said, but I'm a radio hacker, you know. He said, oh, you're in. He said, but I've got to warn you, this was back in the early 80s, I've got to warn you that this cellular radio thing may not come to anything. Just fizzle out. So I said, I'll risk it.
I've heard that story.
When I was a kid in Rocky Ford, Colorado, we didn't have dial. And he picked up the phone, told him who you wanted to talk to, and when it was long distance, the operator would know who I was. She would recognize my voice, and she would usually say, does your mother know who you're calling? I don't think she was supposed to do that, but she did.
Well, I still remember grandmothers.
The cranker?
You crank it so you crank it so many times for different.
Well, they had those in sort of like, you had what they call PBXs, private branch exchanges. That's before the PABXs, the private automatic branch exchanges. And that's where you got people answering the phone rather than the damn machine.
Richard, when I was in college, this was 64 to 68, that it was known, you know, the US phones with the pay phones with the coin slots. The only way the operator knows you actually put a coin in there is they hear the bell. And if you had a tape recorder, they couldn't tell the difference. At the same time, there was a thing at the end, when you hung up, there was a beep tone or something that was transmitted, and it would have something to do with the billing, and if it was an internal call for the bell system, it would go free. And one of the first products, as I understand, I knew this box was available. You could
Blue box.
you got it. You just push this button at the end of your call, and it's free. And the founders of Apple Computer,
Yeah, Steve Wozniak built those.
Steve Wozniak was the first guy that built one of these things. So it's amazing how this stuff grows.
And Kevin
Yeah.
Mitnick was the first guy to go to jail for doing that. And he's got an autobiography which is terrific. It's about 20 CDs. I forget the name of the book, but Kevin Mitnick is the guy. One of the early hackers, and he went to prison. And he's now a security consultant.
He was, Kevin Mitnick was a student at the college where I was, and I was dean of students, and we had to do discipline. And Kevin Mitnick, he was just all over the college. Nothing worked. Wherever he went, nothing worked. So I had him in my office. I said, "Listen, I'm getting reports," and he said, "Well, yeah, I did it." I said, "Okay." And he put his hands on the table, and there was a computer. I said, "Get back, get back." But yeah, he got expelled, and this was he was at Pierce College, and this was 80s, in the mid 80s, and he went on, and you know the rest of the story. But he was quite a character
He made
back
quite a
then.
career.
You actually met him? This guy didn't
He was the dean of students for Kevin.
What's your name?
Liam.
Liam just gave me this. These are Kevin Mitnick's little tools,
Lockpicks,
like
yeah.
burglar's tools, but to work on a computerized system. They're all little metal things with odd shapes.
They're, it's
For a lockpick,
instead
yeah.
of a business card.
A lockpick, and this is his business card.
Are they the serious picks? Or
Yeah,
they are?
yeah. Some of them I recognize.
So you use that as a screwdriver and you got it, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's one. This one is for key locks to knock the tumblers over. The others I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, the whole idea in that is each tumbler is a different length, but if you can get them to just hang up by moving this thing in and out while you put tension on it, you'll get them all in a row, and then you go in and you turn your sweet mate's power off so you don't have to listen to his alarm in the morning. Nobody will ever know how it ever got off.
Okay, guys, show and tell.
Yeah.